Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, breadwinners, thread spinners, all those in between, you're now watching the TNF podcast with your favorite bipolar rock and roller, Mr. J. Curtis Strickland. Do me a favor, click on that like button, click on the subscribe button, click on the little bell for notifications, leave comments in here, please. It helps with the algorithm. Want to list some upcoming shows that we got. John Marino, my good friend from Circle Back, is going to be on the 24th of March at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard. Alex Elkin, he's an LA comedian. He's going to be on the 3rd of April at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. Hoya from Madball, Scarhead, Smoke AD, and the Smoking Word podcast is going to be on the 7th of April at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard. Joe Mustin, Johnny Smurdell is going to be on the 14th of April at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard. Scott Vogel from Terror, Buried Alive, Despair, Slugfest is going to be on the 21st of April at 5 p.m. And Tim McMahon from Mouthpiece, Hands Tied is going to be on the 28th of April at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. Do me a favor. Also, go over to hellsheartco.bigcartel.com. Use the code 20 for 20% off your entire order. We've got a array of shirts in there. Bella Canvas, Tri-Blend, they're 50% polyester, 25% cotton, and 25% rayon. We got a bunch of hardcore themed and like movie mock t-shirts in there. So go and pick one up and get 20% off of everything. That would be outstanding. I'd appreciate you greatly. All right, I want to introduce my guest. He is the front man of the long-standing, they've been around for about 20 years now, which is incredible. Got the privilege of sharing the stage with them a handful of times in one of my bands, Death Blow. That was probably about mid-2000s or so. But they're getting ready to gear up for a tour to go to Europe for a few days. And, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bryan Harris. What's going on, man?
Donna, how are you? Good.
I'm outstanding, man. I hope you're enjoying your St. Patty's Day today.
I sure am. By packing and getting ready to get on a plane tomorrow. But yes, I am.
Got to keep it a little easy today, yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, we actually played with the Dropkicks on Thursday night, this past Thursday to start their St. Patrick's Day little weekend. So that worked out good.
Yeah, I heard about that. How did that go?
It was real good. It was the second time we did like a St. Patrick's Day thing with them. We did it, I don't know, maybe like 2009 or something like that. 2004, I don't
Oh,
know, a
nice.
while ago. That was cool, but yeah, the other night was really, really good. It was a great show. It was us, Pennywise, and them, and it was the first of their 4 or 5 St. Patrick's Day shows this weekend. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
awesome.
And man, Boston shows up for Dropkick Murphys, man.
Oh yeah, yeah. They do like 4 to 6 shows throughout this whole weekend, and they're all sold out. Big venues, like
Oh,
it was at the
wow.
House of Blues. And they always, they're good do so sold out. So
Good crowd response, everything.
yeah, it was good. You never know. Like, I mean, they have a quite a like, they came from the punk rock scene, but they have quite a mixed fan base now. But I think just especially with them and Pennywise and us, it was a really good crowd for everybody. So
I mean, you guys are, pretty adjacent as far as that's concerned. I mean, I love your guys' covers of the Coxbar covers
for
and
sure.
the Dead Boys covers, like, and so that leads into my next question as far as like music is concerned. How did you get involved in music? Did you grow up in like a musical family? Did you play in like a school band or anything? What was like your first exposure to music that really kind of grabbed you?
I mean, I didn't like grow up with much music. I think maybe, what, when I was younger, I definitely like got a saxophone for like elementary school because like they were like, hey, get a instrument, but I like didn't pay any mind. Like I don't know if I ever like remember anything. I don't know what I ever did with it. I'm sure I had like music classes, and I remember it being expensive, but like, which I wish I paid attention. No, I didn't grow up like musically or anything. I mean, I was always into like certain types of music. When I was younger, I was into hip hop. Then I got into more metal and hardcore, I guess, like as I got into like skating and stuff. I wasn't even like amazing at skating. It was just like a subculture that I fell into. Um, it wasn't until later till I like really started like playing in bands. Like later as far as like after like high school and all that stuff, or like right after high school.
Right on. And you grew up in the Boston scene, which I think some of the best hardcore and punk rock bands have come out of that area. I mean, you got your American Nightmare, your Blood for Blood, SSD, stuff like that. All that stuff is incredible to me. I always, I always thought about, moving up to that area to like start a band just because
for
I
sure.
think the musical vibe up there is just so amazing, And so, what do you remember as far as like growing up in Boston? What was that like? And can you remember your first hardcore show or punk rock show and, kind of what was that like?
For sure. I mean, I grew up probably like 10, 15 minutes outside of the city, a suburb called Randolph, but not far. And there was like public transportation to get downtown. Um, when I was younger, like as I said, I was getting into skateboarding stuff, and I met some other people that were like kind of into heavier music. And I do remember specifically watching like Headbangers Ball, and when seeing like Biohazard Punishment video and stuff like that, and I always get it kind of mixed up whether it was like the Headbangers Ball or it was like the Beavis and Buttheads that would like show stuff, the original stuff, and I'd be like, yo, what's that? What's that? The suicidal tendencies videos and stuff, and I was like going from like hip hop into like Slayer and stuff like that, and then like a couple dudes I went to school with, they were like kind of into hardcore, they were into like Downset, Biohazard, stuff that I had seen, and then like I started getting some mixtapes and stuff like that. So and at that time in like Boston, like there was like a lot going on aside from, at that point, Blood for Blood was a band, Reason Enough. And Blood for Blood wasn't a big band because this is like 93, 92, 92, 93. Um, but there was also like Sam Black Church and Tree and like hardcore, like adjacent type bands. Like they weren't
Sure.
technically hardcore. So Boston had a huge, as well as punk scene going on. I mean, Dropkicks were probably playing like halls and stuff back then. The Ducky Boys stuff. Anyways, I went to, like, we used to have this annual thing called Hempfest, like a Freedom Fest, and it was in the downtown in the Boston Common, and it was a free concert, and you could smoke weed that day or something like that. I remember going to that in like Sam Black Church and Tree and a couple other, like 6L6 maybe. I don't know. And that's like when I first saw like what was going on, but I never considered that my first real show. My first real show was 93, and it was at Axis in Boston. It was Biohazard, this band called Stompbox from Boston, which played a bunch of hardcore shows, but I don't know if you would consider them a hardcore band. I love the band. And Reason Enough. And the singer Reason Enough ended up not, I don't even think it was that singer, but the next singer Reason Up ended up being in Reach the Sky. So that band was like, Reason Enough would always play with Blood for Blood at that time.
It's Ian Larrabee, right?
Correct, correct, correct,
Yeah,
correct.
yeah.
So when I saw Reason Up that day, it was the original singer, and then Ian shortly joined that band right after that. And they were a little heavier than Reason Enough. I mean, than Reach the Sky. I apologize. But anyways, yeah. So there was just a lot going on. I mean, there was a lot of clubs at the time. Some of them I was too young to get into because I was like, I don't know, 16, 15. Some would be like 18 plus. But we had the Rat, which was like our CBGBs. I went to a bunch of shows there. There were shows going on at the Middle East, and also like Rhode Island is only like 45 minutes. Like Providence, Rhode Island's about 45 minutes from here. So like anything that would be at like a club in Boston that was 18 plus, like the adjacent to it would be like the night before in Rhode Island at Club Babyhead that was all ages. So I'd get a ride down there. So there was like a lot going on in Rhode Island. And it was weird because you could catch the same tour in Rhode Island, in Providence at like Babyhead. And then the next night at some place in Boston, it'd be a different crowd and different opening bands and stuff like that. And there's just a lot going on at that time. And that was just me starting to go to shows and like figure out what hardcore was.
Man, and what are some like the early like albums and even non-hardcore like what are some of the ones that kind of stick out to you and influenced you the most, you think?
I mean, like even when I was a kid, like I just like stuff that was catchy. You know what I mean? Like I remember like Michael Jackson, Thriller, and like Bruce Springsteen. Like I had singles of that. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
vaguely remembering like paying for that. And then like I was super into hip hop for a minute, and then I like really got into like Slayer and like older Metallica and stuff. But then like that's when the transition came into hardcore. And then when hardcore came, like not to say I don't listen to everything, especially the older I get, I listen to everything. But like once hardcore hit, like it just succumbed me. Like Agnostic Front, One Voice, that album particularly just changed the game for me.
Oh yeah, I love that album too. And that's a band that I really got to. I don't think I really got into them until much later because I didn't really grow up in that era. But
For sure.
a prime highlight of my life was being able to, with my band Deathblow, we opened for Agnostic Front on my birthday, which was fucking awesome.
That's
And those
awesome.
guys are like they deserve all the respect they get.
Oh, for sure.
They're incredible.
Yeah, when
And
I think when that record came out, yeah, because when I got into hardcore, and that was that and like Biohazard, the first record there, as well as other stuff. But I remember that Agnostic Front record. Like I think Roger was in jail at the time or something, so they weren't even whatever it was. The band they had just put out One Voice and they like stopped playing for a bit. So like I got it. I got into hardcore shortly after that came out, and I wasn't able to see them for. I did get to see them when like they finally came back together and they played Rhode Island, but it still was years later. So like there's always a gap in AF, but AF's been around forever, so I feel like they're generational to a lot of people.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, you talk about victim in pain, like,
Oh
so
yeah,
you're a victim in pain guy. I know a lot of people are, or excuse me, One Voice. That a lot of people are into victim in
for sure.
pain. So you feel like
Right.
One Voice is probably the better album.
Yeah, I mean, I love Victim in Pain and stuff. I mean, I guess it's like timing, right? So like if I got in hardcore in 93, I think One Voice came out like 91. So, I remember seeing like that CD in or tape at the record store and I was like, what is this? And bought it. And I don't know that I knew who Agnostic Front was yet. You know what I mean? I was just starting to learn and read thanks lists. So I think that's why, because I don't know that I would have seen Victim in Pain there. And don't get me wrong, like I love just about everything AF does, but I think like, if I gotten into hardcore in 1986, maybe Victim in Pain, you know what I mean? But that One
Sure.
Voice, and like I said, just being like, what is this? And who knows? Maybe I had heard the name Agnostic Front of this point. You know what I mean? That everything with that record and the cover is so iconic. So I forget, but I just know what that record itself had for an impact. But and of course, I started revisiting like all the old Agnostic Front stuff and loved it. But just that record because I found that and that was whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's a lot of albums that are like, the predecessors
For
to,
sure.
or not the predecessors, like the antecessors to certain albums that can kind of, be more, poignant and people can, pick up on them more.
Yep.
I'm trying to think of a few that I had myself. I was like my kind of first exposure to like heavier music. I grew up in Montana, so we didn't
Yep.
really have like a scene or anything, and
Right.
and without cable or anything like that was kind of hard. And I remember seeing on MTV one night, Rage Against the Machine. That was back
Yep.
when they were doing Evil Empire,
Yep.
and
Yep.
and then come to find out those guys are from the hardcore scene
Yeah.
too,
Burn
so it's
hardcore. Yep.
kind of fitting, But
Yep.
Evil Empire to me will always be kind of that album that really got me more so than like their self-titled album.
For sure. It's funny because yeah, Rage at that time, like as I was getting into stuff, I remember the first record being like, "Oh, what's this?" And then like being like, "Is this hardcore?" And like, I mean, I didn't have somebody to be like I had friends that were like into hardcore, but no one would be like, "This is or isn't," and nor should somebody. Like, it's all what it is to you, right? But as a
Sure.
kid, you're just like absorbing everything. You're reading thanks lists. We had a lot of the other cool thing about being in from Boston is there was some free like zines that you would get that actually like were just all underground, but there was like a lot of hardcore interviews as well as like show listings and show reviews and music reviews. Like I said, as well as interviews. So like you'd pick it up and it'd be free and you could get it like when you're downtown. There'd be like little like I don't know what you would call it, like a newspaper machine, but it was really just like here, take this free magazine. And
Yeah.
like I said, besides like all the show listings on the back, you'd be like, oh, there'd be an interview with Blood for Blood or something, or Tree, or a show review, and that's how you just started picking up on other stuff. And you would read a show review or see a cool flyer in there, and you'd be like, oh, I'm going to go to this. Or I'd hear one band, and you go and sit from the beginning to the end. So like, I do feel like being in a bigger city, there's more coming at you. Um, but still, for me though, I feel like that MTV exposure to Biohazard, without that Biohazard video, I'm like, is this metal? Why are these dudes moshing? Like, you know what I
Right.
mean? So
Yeah.
we all have like, I feel like back in the day, MTV was like a very important part to like get into like heavier music, no matter where you lived. And if you lived somewhere that didn't have a huge like underground hardcore punk metal scene, it was definitely like a helpful tool to get people into that.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And to speak of Biohazard, uh, Paris Mayhew and Drew Stone, the directors of
Yep.
that video,
Yep.
are actually podcasting at this moment. So
Yeah.
hopefully some of the people from that show will trickle over to this show. But yeah, Biohazard was one of those ones where it was like, to be truthful with you, I didn't actually get into Biohazard until like much later in life, but
For
I
sure.
always knew who they were. Like
Yep.
I'd always, they were on the Judgment Night soundtrack, and like,
Another huge
they
thing.
were always like, people would mention them with like other hardcore bands, but
Yep.
they were different in that they kind of implemented that like hip hop sound,
Yep.
so
Yep.
you didn't always immediately associate them with
Right.
hardcore, but then
Right.
that was like pretty typical of New York, like where they would as Richie from Wisdom and Chain says, they got that bounce, man,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and they're
Like the
like
bad ball
very
style,
like groovy,
the
yeah.
biohazard thing. Yeah, a lot of bands had that there. And I feel like it's weird because I feel like when I got coming from somebody that was like into hip hop, like fairly decent, and then getting into hardcore, and like stepping through metal, bands like Biohazard and Madball, and even Agnostic Front didn't have much of a bounce. I mean, don't get me wrong, like One Voice has some of that because of Matt Henderson and Will Shepler, but Madball really set that. But they had that like urban street feel to the metal. That's why I was like, okay, so I listen to hip hop and I get that kind of. I see metal, and then I see these dudes that are playing metal but have a hip hop feel. And granted, like you said, like especially Biohazard as it progressed, they had some more like crossover stuff with the Judgment Night soundtrack, and then you get into bands like E Town Concrete, but just that little bit originally of that New York hardcore feel just had like, and I know like obviously not bands like Warzone and stuff like that, but certain bands they just had a little bit of that crossover vibe before it really like became more and more crossover, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned Blood for Blood, and I know there was some controversy with them a few years ago.
Sure.
Do you think they'll ever resurface? Do you think they'll ever make a return?
So I mean, they wouldn't with the original line or the original singer or something like that. I know a few years ago they were working on having a different singer, and they recorded some songs and stuff like that, and it just fell apart again. Not because of like something bad. Just actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know everything, but I just know like just some like inner band stuff.
Sure.
Not like, oh, this new singer did something horrible. Like, no, they recorded stuff they were planning on doing it, and then a couple members had a falling out again. Just like love hate relationship, I'm sure. And I
Yeah.
think Rob, like after like him putting more effort into it to like record the older songs with the new singer or what, I think it was a handful of old songs and maybe a couple of new songs, and they're going to put it out. I think just after that, Rob, and I've seen Rob once or twice, and he actually didn't even really want to talk about it, but I've just seen it on his Facebook post, like before he like avoided the internet. He was just kind of like, it's like you keep on trying, and things fall apart. And then after the last attempt, he was just like, I'm done with music. So
Mm.
I don't think so, to be honest with you, which is, it sucks. It's sad. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
one of my favorite
I was a
bands.
big fan, man. I liked
Oh,
them a
me too.
lot. It's a
Yeah,
shame. So let's talk a little bit about Death Before Dishonor. And actually, did you have any bands or any kind of like proto projects before you did Death Before Dishonor?
for sure. Yeah. Like when I started getting into hardcore, I started meeting, some people from going to shows. And there was this band called Brawl Park. And they probably started around the same time as like Blood for Blood. They played, a local hardcore band. I thought they were great. I had their tape and whatnot. And then I was working at Domino's, in the Domino's in the next town. The same owner owned both of them. And this dude came in to pick something up, and he was wearing a Brawl Park shirt. Anyways, that was the drummer. I met him. I started hanging out at the studio where they rehearsed. He's like, "Oh, come down and hang out." And then I got to like see like how dudes do a band, because if before that I'd be like, oh, they're just like, yeah, I know it's not metal where they're backstage like they're hanging out, but I'm like, I don't know how to start a band. So I got to like hang out with this band Brawl Park a bit, and their singer was always like away at college, so like I do a cover with them like in rehearsal, but I got to see how that unfolded. I met other people, and I ended up joining this band called Incision. um they did a demo before me, and then I don't know. They had two singers. They had a falling out. I was young. I joined the band, and I was in that band for like a few years till it ended. We played like we did like a tape, a CD, played some East Coast shows, played some local shows. Um, and this was all out of Brockton in like the late '90s, which is a suburb city of Boston. So you always hear people refer to Brockton and Boston. when shows aren't happening in Boston or clubs are not happening, people do shows in Brockton for some reason, or sometimes they're simultaneously. Um, but there was a rehearsal studio that did shows there in the late '90s, from like '96 to '99, called 121, and yeah, my band Incision rehearsed out of there, and I think that band went from like '96 to '99, probably that time frame. And when that band ended, me and the drummer of that band started Death Before Dishonor.
And how well were you guys received? I mean, I'm sure like Boston just seems pretty tight as far as like bands kind of sticking together and whatnot. But like, how well were you initially received there? And did you immediately embark on touring after that, or how did that work?
Death Before Dishonor you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
See, Boston's weird because Boston's not a big city, and like I don't, maybe part of me growing up in a suburb, but I feel like a lot of people grow up in a suburb. I mean, there are people that are actually from the city. Don't get me wrong. Less and less now. Boston also has a bunch of universities, so like a lot of people come and go to Boston. So, anyways, when we started, Death Before Dishonor was coming out of this Brockton scene. That club that I was just telling you about had just closed down, and they were doing shows in the city again. I feel like it took a little bit for like we had like a bunch of our friends in a small following, but like it took a few years. Like we did like a bunch of, I feel like even at first we did better in like Pennsylvania than we even did in Boston proper, just because first of all there was like a lack of venues and shows to get on. So we do like suburb shows, and these are places that would be like, oh, it's a hardcore show, and then after the first hardcore show they're like, we're never having hardcore shows again.
Yeah.
So like, first of all, like, yeah, your friends would come that would know you, but you're not building a following because no one has a place to go. And there were people doing shows in the city at the time, and I don't know that we necessarily like were friends with them. We weren't not friends, but you know what I mean? Like there was just a little gap. But like I had built off the relationships from my old band, so I'd go to like, we'd play shows in Pennsylvania, just throughout the Northeast. So we were just doing whatever we could. We were doing weekends. We didn't hit the ground like touring. We started in 2001. I always say that because that's when we put out our first demo. And then we put out a record in 2002 on Spook City, called True to Death. So between 2001 and 2004, we were just like weekend warriors, but like as much as possible. And I would say starting in 2003, like late 2 and 3, things started really picking up for Death Before Dishonor, like in Boston. And then the crucial point to Death Before Dishonor was getting signed to Bridge 9 and putting out Friends Family Forever in 2005. And that's where the trajectory of the band like really changed, in my opinion.
How did the connection with Bridge 9 come about? Because, I remember a lot of the bands on there, like in the
Yep.
earlier days, and they were definitely more of kind of the old school traditional, like
Yep.
even, goes so far as saying like positive hardcore.
For
And
sure.
then I knew that, you guys had signed to Bridge 9, and I was like, oh damn, those guys are a little bit like, brawnier and kind of more got
For sure.
that like, tough sound. Like how did that connection come to be?
So, I mean, at this point, it's like 2003. We're playing a bunch of shows, and we're looking for like a new label, just to get out more, And then I know Chris, or I meet Chris. I mean, Chris is around Boston. We're playing more Boston shows, and I remember like either sending or giving him a record, or a friend gave him a record, True to Death, and he was honest. He's like, and you got to remember the band's sound really did change a little bit from True to Death to Friends Really Forever. Not like crazy, but we just matured a little bit. We went from like 20-year-old kids to whatever. Um, I never liked the recording sound of True to Death. Like we were literally kids, and I feel like all those songs like are run-on sentences, and like as we're playing more shows and learning our stuff a little better, like by the time we're ready to record Friends Really Forever, just the EP version, because that's what it was when it started. It was only like 7 songs. We were still heavy, but it was just like a little, there was faster stuff in us. Anyways,
Yeah.
so Chris heard it and was like, the band's, I see the band everywhere. He came to a show and the show was great. And he was like, you know what? Like, I don't really love this record, but like, it seems like your sound's evolving a little bit. And then we started talking from there, and Chris was really cool. He was, I think that was the time too, like, I think Terror had just left. Some of his bigger bands had just left Bridge 9.
Sure.
And he wanted bands that were just out there touring, and like we wanted to tour. So I'm like, listen, we'll take every opportunity we can. He helped us get into a studio that I always wanted to get into. which was the Outpost. That's where like Blood for Blood recorded. You know, later down the road, Have Heart did. Dropkicks always used to always record there, but I was like, I want to record there, and you know, he helped make that connection. That's where we recorded "Friends with Me Forever," and that's when like, so we make that connection with Chris. Chris links us with, you know, our songs are a little better in my opinion. We go in to record "Friends with Me Forever." We record it. It's in like, you know, it's coming out in like April, and then all of a sudden, like Chris is like, you know, gearing up for the release. So he's sending promos out everywhere, and we land. Terror cancels off of a tour in Europe with Agnostic Front. They were supporting Agnostic Front. It was 2005, and on like 10 days' notice, there was some like family emergency. I don't know. I'll forever thank Terror for this, but they canceled off this tour, and somebody in Europe, this guy Ono Chromag, rest in peace, he had the promo version of Friends Only Forever, and they needed a 4-piece band to do this tour. And literally, we got hit up like, "Hey, can you guys be?" They hit up Bridge 9 and said, "Hey, can Before Dishonor replace Terror on this tour?" It's 6 weeks long. I've never toured more than 7 days, maybe in a row. We didn't even have passports, and then we were just like, "Yeah, we'll figure it out." Luckily, we had a passport office, expedited it,
Expedite,
and
yeah.
yeah, oh, it cost a lot of money, but yeah, we ended
Shit,
up doing
yeah.
that tour. So that was like February 2005, and I think the Friends Only Forever came out on Bridge 9 in April 2005. So from there on, we just, it was like balls to the wall. So we met AF. They were really cool on that tour. They loved us. They took Love Is Red broke up, and they were doing a U.S. tour right afterwards for the Another Voice tour. So we ended up doing 6 weeks in Europe, coming home for like a week or two, and then 6 weeks in the States slash Canada with Agnostic Front. So
Shit.
we went from like not touring to like touring 200 days a year for
Getting like
five,
a
6.
touring juggernaut.
Yeah, yeah. And thanks to, like I said, I mean, I didn't know Terror at that point. I'd met Scott and Nick once, but I didn't like know him super well. But I was like, that was the best, you know, Terror did the best thing for me. And then Agnostic Front, like that bond that we built with Agnostic Front on that tour. Cause I remember Roger being like, Roger didn't know us. He heard the record and he heard good things. And I remember him calling me before the tour and being like, all right, this is like, he was very like professional, and Roger's kind of crazy. And I was like, dude, this is going to be weird. But we were on a bus with Agnostic Front and Diecast. I was like, this is sick.
Oh
Um,
shit.
yeah, it was supposed to be Agnostic Front, Terror, Diecast, but you know, Terror canceled. So it was DVD, Diecast, and AF. And that was 6 weeks. And yeah, Roger was just, all those guys, but Roger really helped us out. And when Love Is Red broke up, and our and this is the time where there was like sound scan and stuff, but our record actually wasn't out yet. So his agent's like, well, what are their sound scans? I was like, dude, I don't know. We don't have, I don't even know what it is. But Roger pushed and got us on, and we just kind of went wild from there on.
It's awesome, man. You know, and you thank Terror for dropping off the tour. It's interesting because when my band Deathblow was first starting out, Full Blown Chaos dropped off a show with
Yep.
Terror and Love Is Red and Hatebreed, and that was like I think our fourth show ever,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
was to like thousands of kids, and it was fucking awesome. So
That's amazing.
I will be forever grateful to Full
Yeah.
Blown Chaos for giving up the ghost for that show. And
There was that time, and like, oh, you know, what's funny is some of that run that of that Agnostic Front run, Full Blown was on it. It was like there was different people on different parts. We ended up being on, I think it was a total of like an 8-week US tour. We were on 6 because we were right after that. Like, because before this all unfolded, we already had a like our CD release tour. We were going out blacklisted on a full US tour. So we already had that booked. But yeah, Full Blown was on a bunch of that tour. Champion, Love Is Red was supposed to be, they broke up. Who else was on that? I don't know. A bunch of people.
wow. Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
And talking about Agnostic Front, like, my experience with Agnostic Front was I talked to Roger for a little bit. He was very quiet.
Yeah.
Was that kind of your experience with him?
He is at first. He's quiet. Like, I don't know how to, yeah, I didn't know how to take him. Yeah, he was kind of quiet. He's very straightforward. And then once you get to know him, he's not, I mean, he's Roger, but like in his head, I don't know. I feel like he's kind of like messing with you by doing that. I don't know. He's always sizing everybody up. He's a great guy though. But once you like really get to know him, the guy's phenomenal.
Yeah, Stigma though, he was just
Oh,
like
he'll talk it all up.
life of the party.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I have a great story where he comes I went up to him and I was like, "Oh man, you guys, this was I think before we played with him. They did like a tour with Seven Star and somebody else and
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, "Hey, man, can I buy you a beer? And he's like, how about I buy you a beer, my friend? He took me in the back of the dressing room, pulled a beer out, the cooler, and just handed it to me.
As
I was
in
like,
buying
that's
you one.
fucking
Yeah,
awesome. Yeah.
typical
He
stigma.
just, he seems like he's just kind of a charismatic guy.
Oh, he is. He's literally a character, and he's still like that to this day. And I think Roger is the offset to that, or for like Roger, like I said, he's a little bit crazy. So like for everybody that's having fun, he's got to make things like a little difficult to keep himself entertained. Um,
Sure.
but he's definitely like you know, I mean, everybody thinks Stigma is just party. I mean, Stigma, he knows what he's doing, but also like Roger's just the guy that's always like on top of everything. So like
Sure.
when he's quiet, it's probably because he's got a million things going on, but he's also just reading the room or reading the person he's talking to, and he's very this and that. And so like it's almost like this. Like I said, when I got that first phone call, I'm like, I remember hanging up being like, this guy's kind of a dick. This is gonna suck. And he wasn't at all. You just figure out he's just being straightforward, no bullshit. And then you
Sure. Yeah.
meet him and you're like, okay, cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I was kind of reading up on your guys' biography a bit, and to kind of harken back to the like, being tour juggernauts, you guys have played just about everywhere in the world. And I noticed one of the spots you guys played was the Middle East. What was that like?
We played I mean people put it there. We played Israel, Tel Aviv,
Okay, Israel.
and we played Istanbul. I haven't played like the true Middle East. I don't know where that came up, but people have said that. Now, unless they're talking about the club, the Middle East, but I'm like, I don't think so.
No, I
Like I
think
said,
that like the geographic region, yeah.
yeah. So I'm like, I've played very weird stuff. I mean, I played like all types of Eastern Europe stuff. Like actually on this tour, so I leave tomorrow. We have like 3 shows in Spain, Portugal. Then we fly to Georgia, then Kazakhstan, then Istanbul. And we've been to Istanbul again. So Istanbul's weird because it's like half of it is Middle Eastern and half is Asian or something like that. I don't know. But
Okay.
we played Tel Aviv, Israel. That was pretty. I mean, Tel Aviv itself was, and this is pre like all this stuff going on right now there. It was. I mean, you go to Tel Aviv and it's very Americanized, but getting in and out of the
Yeah,
country is very. It's just weird. You know what I mean? You're at the airport, you can tell people like, but other than that, we haven't done. One time we were supposed to play some crazy place. I forget where, but it never ended up happening. But that's as far as I've gone there. Other than that, though, I've done like all of Eastern Europe, some Southeast Asia, Russia, you name it. We've done a bunch of stuff.
yeah. What's kind of one of your favorite like tour highlights as far as places to play?
I mean, it's always cool to go somewhere new. I love going anytime we're in like Mexico or Central America. It's tough because I just like traveling and like people are like, oh, you get to see this and that. And a lot of the traveling we do is never like, oh, we got to see the most beautiful beach. And that does happen once in a while, but it's really like,
Sure.
I just like different cultures. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, and we get to see like the real deal as much as like, yeah, once in a while you're at a cool beach and stuff. And like one of my favorite places that I have been to was Australia. It's beautiful. But also like Mexico and not like touristy Mexico. You know what I mean? Or
sure.
like Central America is very interesting and unique. And like I played Ecuador for the first time right after the pandemic. And I'd been to Central America. I never played Ecuador. And that place was pretty wild. Really cool. Good food, nice people. Shows were insane. I also feel like when you go to places that don't get a lot of international bands, they appreciate it
Yeah,
a lot more.
for
Um,
sure.
so it's weird because it's like one of my favorite places to go show wise. Some of those unique places are always kind of the best shows. On top of like I don't know, Berlin, Germany is one of my favorite cities.
I hear Berlin is awesome.
It is show wise and just city wise. I think it's a really cool city. I don't know, man. I just like to go. Like I said, I get to go to Georgia for the first time in Kazakhstan. I don't know. We'll find out what
See
it's like next.
Borat.
Gonna see Borat. That's literally. I like years ago. If you asked me, I would have thought it was a fake country because of Borat. I don't know. I didn't pass social studies or geography. Um, but yeah, it should be interesting. The show should be cool. I mean, I don't know what to expect. It could be the weirdest thing ever. But I'm looking forward just to see what it's like there.
Nice. That's awesome, man. I think that that's on any band's bucket list is to go just internationally, and you
For
guys have
sure.
done it like extensively, and I always ask this question, like probably what's the most interesting tour experience you've had where it's something that only like a hardcore band could experience. I had As Friends Rust on here, Damien, a while back, and he said they were mobbed in Paris by a
Yeah.
bunch of angry people that ended up shattering the windows in their van and like pointing guns at him. What's the craziest shit that's ever happened?
So I'll say so we did we were on tour at Ignite for like 2 months, and we went to, aside from like, regular mainland Europe shows, we did all of Eastern Europe, and we were on a double decker bus with them, and we went into Belarus, which used to be part of Russia. They call it White Russia. Um, and like I said, so all I know is the bus pulls up to a venue, and this wasn't like going to be a massive show. I mean, even though we're in a bus, we're still playing a venue that's like 300 capacity or something like that, 3 to 4, and the dudes doing it are like hardcore kids, hardcore guys, whatever, not kids.
Oh,
We're about to like load in, and a bunch of guys in plain clothes go into the building, talk to the owner. Owner's like, this show can't happen here. And we're like, what? And so I guess in Belarus, there's still the KGB, and that's exactly what they were. And the kid tried to move it to another venue, and the same thing happened. These guys that didn't talk to us at all, but kept on following us. And I guess they had been following us from the border. And the border was a whole to do. Like, you get to the border, we're at the border for 2 hours. It went through the whole bus, and then we had to pay like $1,000, not us, but like the bus driver did, and it comes out of the tour thing, because of the size of the bus in this country, at like a desk. Like, this was not like, oh, here's the road tax. There's just a guy with a gun that's not pointing it at you, but like, anyways. So show never happened. Like, to the point where it was getting later, and kids that like came to this park where like there were 2 different venues were like following the bus around. They were like trying to buy merch off of us. It would have been a crazy show. And then, so anyways, we leave there in the bus, and we go find a hotel, because the bus driver cannot drive anymore. Like, it's all digital there, and his time's
sure.
up. So we park in front of a hotel. We all get rooms. They're like $30. Just, I mean, we could have stayed on the bus, but you need a shower and stuff. Also, like, Belarus has the most fallout from Chernobyl. It's that close to Chernobyl. So like,
Holy
of
shit.
course you shower in a thing. Anyways, but yeah, so the cops came back on the bus later, and they said, they were convinced we were there to like spread some crazy message. And that if anybody, they said specifically, they said if anybody with a shaved head or tattoos gets in trouble tonight in the city, they're going to arrest everybody on the bus. They're trying to get the whole bus to just leave. They're like, leave our country now, or leave the city. We were in Brest, Belarus. And we actually played Minsk, Belarus the next day, and there was no problem. But yeah, so like I said, I didn't ask questions, but 99, because the kids were like, that's the KGB. Like, that's the secret police. You don't mess with them. You do not want to get arrested by them. And they shut the show down for no reason at all.
Shit.
Damn it. Yeah, for
That
no
is
reason.
that's wild, man.
There's,
Um,
I'm sure there's plenty more. I mean, there's always something. When you go to some weird places, just weird things happen. You always got to be on a swivel. But
I would say they probably did that because, they, like, the skinhead, like the Aryan skinhead thing is like real big in Russia and a lot of the
yeah,
satellite states, and they probably, affiliated you with those guys when you
right. They
mentioned like having
push
shaved heads and
heads, and
stuff.
like, also too, like, if you really listen to Ignite, I love Ignite. Like, some of their lyrics are like
Very political, yeah.
very political, and Zoli's actually Hungarian originally.
Right.
So I'm sure there's something to that, not like him, but just them being like whatever. But you're not wrong. Like, you show up, you're playing heavy music, you're covered in tattoos, people got shaved heads or whatever, and over there's like a huge like Nazi far right movement going on, and they're probably just tying all that, just assuming everybody's
Right.
there. They're not like, oh,
Yeah.
these are anti-racist,
Right, right. Of course.
Yeah,
And you know, to kind of, go into another subject, you guys are kind of affiliated with FSU. Like,
yeah.
what's the I mean, I know that was started by like Elgin James and some other guys back in the day. Is that still kind of running strong within Boston? Are there still like affiliated bands
Yeah.
and
I mean, it's
what's kind of the
a thing,
is there is there like a beatdown process to get in there? How does that work?
dude, it's just a bunch of friends. Everybody thinks it's like crazy. I mean, yeah, there's big guys, there's strong guys, there's people that don't put up shit. But like, like even me growing up, like all the older guys in Boston were that, and then I was that, and then I don't know, there's a bunch of younger guys, and I mean, it goes through its phases where people are like, this is crazy, this is that. We're just a bunch of guys that hang out and go to shows, and
Friends stand united.
I also think like also like nowadays it's like the way shows are and the way kids are, it's a lot different than it was. Like, you got to remember, like, people always like associated Boston. I'm sure, like, I can't, I went to shows in the late 90s, but I don't, and you hear stories, but I don't know what 92, I wasn't there. I could tell you the stories I heard, but there were Nazis and stuff like that people deal with. And then when we were going to shows, a lot of the shows that were happening were like right across from Fenway Park, and we get all these drunk idiots that come in that had nothing to do with hardcore shows, and there'd be fights everywhere. And then now it's like, now shows are great and it's very diverse and it's like not really violent, but it's a lot of younger kids. Not
Sure.
to represent people that couldn't handle stuff, but it's just a different vibe at shows now, which is kind of cool. So, and you see that a lot in Boston too. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of older dudes that are around that like help continue keep the scene going, whether it's book shows or just at shows or doing being in bands.
Sure.
But a lot of younger kids like they almost like don't have to grow up around what we did in a way, or just like
Sure.
the culture of what was going, like, because even like Boston as a city, not that the mid 90s it was like horrible or anything, but it's just a different time. And now that it's more gentrified, it's like nothing's really happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not saying there isn't parts of the city where things are, but that's more just like street violence stuff. You know what I mean?
Sure. And I mean, FSU was kind of started in response to a lot of the Nazi knuckleheads that were coming
Yeah,
in
yeah. So
the
like in
scene.
the late 80s and 90s, it was like and you'll hear like I'm sure if you had people on your show and stuff, like the culture of punk and hardcore in the late 90s, it was kind of just like anybody. And then like there's always these stories about like Pennsylvania had like shows and a bunch of Nazis showed up. I mean, Boston's like a very liberal city and kind of always has been, minus I guess some stuff in the 80s, but we're also like close to New Hampshire, and not that New Hampshire is kind of liberal, but it has a lot of woods, and it's always like you always get weirdos from the woods that like I don't know believe in some weird shit and show up and shouldn't really be welcome with those beliefs. I mean, even now, like I saw like lately, there's like a big resurgence in like right wing. I keep on saying right. I don't want to say right wing, but like actually like Nazi stuff that's going on that are like they're not people that go to shows now. They're just on the internet and like show up at like book readings and I don't know. But
Yeah.
at least show wise, you're not dealing with these people coming in and out of here.
Sure. And there's a lot of like extremity to both sides of like the political spectrum, and like there would be people on the left or the right that would say, these
For
fucking weirdos, they don't speak for us, and then
sure.
these fucking weirdos over here, they don't speak for us. And so it kind of like, ruins it for everybody, because you might, kind of have more like beliefs that are in the center, or even slightly left of center,
For
slightly
sure.
right of center,
That's
but it's
why
always
it's
the
almost
assholes that ruin it.
I feel like back in the day it was like, oh, these right wing Nazis, but now it's like I don't even it's not even like whatever. It's just there there are actually like anyways, this group of people are like for sure Nazis. But you're right, like as far as a spectrum, it's like I don't even get in right, left. It's just the middle. Just don't be a
Don't be an
hole.
asshole.
If that like a swear not, but yeah, just don't be an asshole and don't be racist and be cool.
Yeah. It's pretty simple.
It really is. I mean, sometimes you look around and you're like, I don't even know what's simple anymore. I just try to do my thing and whatever. But yeah, a lot of that stuff that the old Boston, like, for whatever reason, like I said, I wasn't around in the late 80s and 90s. But yeah, there was a big movement of that like no longer exists because of people
Yeah,
like that. You know what I mean? And
that's
then
true,
like
man.
I'm sure like me and my friends did dumb stuff, but there was like, there was generations of stuff going on in shows that we changed how certain things went. So like now those things don't matter anymore. You know what I mean? You're not getting, not that you can't just be a drunk guy coming from Fenway Park and go to a hardcore show. Of course you can, but like the really like neighborhood bro drunk gonna go start a bar fight at a hardcore show is not happening. Most of the time it's not happening. It also changed because like the street next to Fenway Park used to have more venues that did hardcore shows, and they're not really there anymore, which is probably for the better, just for like people mixing. You know what I mean? Although
Yeah.
that is where we played. The House of Blues is right there, and we did play there with Dropkicks and Pennywise the other night, and there was no problems. But I mean, it's not like the Rat used to be like a block away from there, and so it wasn't Bill's Bar. And these are smaller venues that like you could walk in afterwards, and if somebody wasn't at the door and there was a hardcore show getting on, you technically snuck in. And if you're drunk, you're like, oh, these guys are pushing each other. We're gonna go punch them in the face. You know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah, fuck that.
Yeah,
That's the worst, having to deal with those kinds of
for
people.
sure.
And we're kind of talking about, like, the way that the world is now, like, what do you kind of make of everything that's transpired, like, within the past few years, like, as far as, like, the status of this country, the status of this world, like, what do you feel is gonna do you feel good things are gonna come on the horizon? You think bad things? What do you think?
I think that everything seems crazy, and it's weird because like, all right, you would never think in a million years that a hardcore show couldn't happen, right? Like, so I live in a city where like, oh, they're like, you know what? They shut down. There was one point where like the cops shut down all the hardcore shows in Boston because they thought like it was just this whole criminal thing. It was whatever, it was stupid, right?
Yeah.
But we're like, okay, so we'll just like do house shows or we'll get a VFW. Like it didn't matter. Okay, so you can't play the club. My point is, regardless of who shuts down what. So in my head, I'm like, anytime someone says you can't do it, the hardcore punk thing is just do it yourself, right? So if the
Right.
club says no more hardcore shows because they got a lawsuit because someone fell and hurt themselves, you just do a basement show or a hall show. You do it yourself. So when the pandemic hit, and I remember we had just done a West Coast run and we were coming home. It was March 5th, and I think everything like shut down the 15th. I remember being like, this is weird, but I'm like, and we had a Canada run coming up. And I was like, all right, maybe like we can't get into Canada, but like whatever, we can just do other shows. And then when shows didn't happen, I was like, and the world shut down, I was like, damn, I never saw that coming.
Mhm.
And then I just took it for what it is. I think one thing I learned after that though, one thing I learned after that is I feel like I took some things for granted, and I try not to. As far as shows and stuff like that, like I'm 45. I live 10 minutes away from downtown Boston. I live in Quincy, right outside. I still try to catch as many shows as I can. I'm not at, every single show. But I still try to go out, young bands, older bands. I will say, like, after the pandemic, even my own band, I was like, man, time is precious. Like, try to do what you can. And then, like, since the pandemic, I think like half of the world has gone crazy and the half is whatever. So I don't know how to look at things. And I honestly try to do like this weird, like, I do what I need to do for myself. Like obviously, right, work, play in the band. I try to stay positive and like just appreciate everything that comes to me. Right, like I don't overthink things. Be fortunate that I get to travel and go places. And like, I was never a big like coming from punk and hardcore, more hardcore, but then punk. Like I've never voted. I've never like I just was like an anti. I just started paying taxes like 10 years ago. I don't know. I was like, I just stay off the books. Oh, I'll do this. I don't fucking know.
Sure.
Uh, I was in a hardcore band that like literally like we paid ourselves $20 a day when we were touring 200 days a year because we had no money. So like, what are you taxing? I don't know. So the older I get, like you like become a regular human. But I really just try not to pay too much attention. Besides, like just like be a good person. Uh, I try to, like I said, I just try to appreciate. I can't overthink things because it's like I feel like every time I turn around, something's a conspiracy theory or the world's a conspiracy. And it's like if you go down that rabbit hole, it's easy to do that. So I just like
Oh yeah.
I try to just do me and like it's like you said, like, oh, well, you go to Belarus and the cops approach you and you're like, all right, this could go one of two ways, right? Like you could end up in a Russian prison tonight or not, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to act like the world is like that, but I just try to navigate the world in a positive way. And just like if you just keep positive, and I don't mean like I'm a positive dude, I just mean like or keep focused. It's easier for me that way, I think, because otherwise it's just like I don't know. You can look at it two ways. You'd be like, oh no, everything is grim. Like I remember when we started touring right after the pandemic, everybody's like, things will never be the same. Things will never be the same. And shows were like great when things opened back up. And shows are actually still great. Like hardcore has had a big resurgence. But also like you're going to places that people are like, you're never gonna be able to travel again. Well, I've gone to a bunch of weird places and there's no issues and everything's fine. So it's like just get out there, have fun, do your thing, and like try not to listen to all the nonsense.
Yeah, I hear you, man. What you mentioned going to shows and trying to stay active in the scene. Who are some, like, younger bands or some newer bands that are coming up? Specifically in the Boston scene, and maybe even nationally and internationally.
There's a lot coming on in Boston. I mean, Boston's great right now. There's a lot of young. So like Boston now. Remember how you were like, all right. So when you started Before Dishonor, where Boston's close to tight, like it was like weird because at that time, as small as Boston was, it was very divided in a weird way, and not some of it was the sound of your music, but it really was like where you lived.
Sure.
Where now it's like almost like every kid is in three other bands, and everybody's like super connected, which is a great thing. This band Risk from Boston. They've been around a couple of years, but they're still like a younger band. I think they're great. New band called Haywire. COA, Colin of Arabia, which is like an older band that
Great
just put
band.
7-inch recently, which is a great 7-inch.
Yeah.
Their stuff. Uh, this band called Opposition from Boston. They're great, younger band. And then we just got back from the West Coast. Oh, this band is not from Boston, but this band Hold My Own. It's the singer of Mongoloid's newer
Oh
project.
yeah, I remember them.
Great band. We just did some shows with them on the West Coast, as well as a band called Out of Pocket from Northern California, from the Bay Area. They're killing it right now. And this band Twisted Cane from LA. Those are some West Coast bands that we're just out with. We just did a 10-day run. We got back last week. Those shows were phenomenal. Internationally, again, there's so much going on. This band called Mind War from Belgium is great. Let me try. I don't know. There's a million bands. I like this band Risk It from Germany. They're great, but they've actually been around for a bit now, so they're not a new band. There's a lot of bands. You go down a rabbit hole. There is a lot of bands out there.
Yeah, the reason I asked, I'm trying to get some new blood on this show. I'm a bit out of the loop myself, so
Yeah,
yeah, I'm always looking for good new recommendations.
bands around here. Risk is a little more on like a pale horse sounding band. They're cool.
Mhm.
A Wire's cool, more like fast old school. Definitely check out Hold My Own. I really dig that band. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm sure. I'll be gonna be like there's 100 more, but there's a lot. Yeah, and it's hard to like get a pathway to some of these bands. Conservative Military Image, CMI, they're doing a lot of great things. Triple B itself is a record label, has a lot of stuff going on right now, and they're putting out a lot of young bands like Mind Force and stuff like that are just shredding.
Oh, right on, man. Um, what's a day in the life of Brian like? What do you do to kind of bide your time when you're not playing in the band?
I install and maintain fish tanks. Um, so that's like my job. Obviously, the band doesn't pay $1 million. I truly like enjoy still doing the band, and like we plan on we got a lot more lined up. So, but yeah, when I'm home, I'm married. Me and my wife, we don't have kids. Day in the life is pretty much go to work, come home, show going on, cool. Me and my wife will check it out. She's into hardcore as well.
Good. I was gonna say like that it would be awesome to have that dynamic. I'm not married, but I always wanted that one day where it's like, hey, you want to go see a hate breed show, or you want,
Yeah,
like.
yeah, I met my wife at a show. We've been together for a long time. Like she's a guidance counselor now, but like we still go to shows together or not, or go to dinner and hang out and hang out with regular friends. But usually it's just like basic, we both work, come home, eat dinner, maybe watch some TV, and but like that's in between. Like DVD is still doing a bunch of stuff, and we're trying to stay active without doing like the day and age of like 200 days a show, 200 shows a year. I think is like it's a little bit of a different ball game. Don't get me wrong, bands like Terror are still out there killing it and shredding it and doing stuff like that. And much respect to them. And we're doing a lot more than we have been, but like strategically, you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. What do you do anything like creatively outside of the band? Like, do you draw? Do you write? Do you do anything like that?
No, I'm the worst. The band. So I deal with a lot of stuff in the band too. Like we don't have a manager. We have a booking agent, but even with like I do a lot of that stuff. So like if I'm not working and when I'm doing, like I said, I install like aquariums and stuff like that. Anything from like the smallest thing to like
Something at a bank or like a big building or
yeah,
something?
huge ones that are like actual custom plumbing to a basement. So like some of that stuff takes up a bunch of my time too because it requires me using my brain. And don't get me wrong, some days I just go in and clean fish tanks, and then other days it's like, oh, can you plumb this 7-foot tank to the basement all the way, whatever. But yeah, I don't, but I deal with a lot of the bands like touring, like the Book and Angel book stuff. I
Logistics.
deal with all the other stuff with that, so that kind of takes up a bunch of my time. Um, My wife is super crafty. I wish I was. So like when I'm home, if I'm not doing work, band, or just like hanging out, I just like watch TV shows and decompress and try not
What
to
have you
think.
been watching lately?
I just started watching Shogun. That's pretty sick.
I
Uh,
hear that's great.
yeah, it's only like a few episodes in. Phenomenal. Curb Your Enthusiasm's back, so I've been, I love Curb. It's the last season.
Yeah,
Um, Tokyo Vice on Max is pretty cool.
I've heard
Um,
of that one.
yeah, it's on season 2. It's pretty cool. I watch a lot of shows, man. I like, especially so aside from when I'm home and decompressing. I mean, when I'm on tour too, it's like, especially in Europe, if I'm not, we have a driver there or something. Post the
Yeah,
states where I'm driving, I'm watching TV shows, so I kind of have the opportunity to watch anything. So I really like. I I used to be super into movies, but now I feel like TV shows have like overcome that because they're being done in like, even if it's a mini series, it's 6 to 8 seasons,
it's
opposed
like a
to
film that's like 6 or 8 hours long. You know?
in some. Don't get me wrong. There's some stories that don't need to be told that long, but there's some that are really cool in that format.
Oh yeah, I got real into Tulsa King a while back. That
So
one really
I
held my
feel like
attention.
the dude that does that, Taylor Sheridan, he does like Yellowstone.
Yeah,
The prequel, like, so Yellowstone's cool, but 1929, whatever. He has two prequels. One of them's like
yeah.
19 whatever and
19.
18.
I think it's 1924, and then
Sure. And
yeah,
eight.
I know what you're talking about though. Yeah.
Those are both great, but he also does Mayor of Kingstown as well as Tulsa King. Mayor Kingstown is phenomenal. It's one of my favorite shows. I think it's going on season 3 or 4. It's really cool.
Nice. And who's like I forgot to ask you this question. Like, who is like the? Do you guys have like a practical jokester in the band, or like a funny guy? Like, who's the comedian in your guys' band?
It's, I mean, we all kind of joke around. I mean, you have to be at the point where you kind of just like mess with each other, but I don't know. It tends to be me after a couple of drinks. You know what I mean? I'll bust some balls or just try to be funny.
That's great,
Sometimes,
man.
so like sometimes you're like, the things that we do, just like the traveling and everything, is just so insane that you just like have to just be dumb about stuff and make people laugh. Otherwise, you're just gonna have that like, or you just know, like you've been on tour for 9 days and you got 2 more days left, and the next two are the worst traveling days. You just gotta like set the mood so people just aren't on edge. So I would say
Yeah.
probably y'all have kind of all just dick around and kind of make jokes to make each other
Cut
laugh.
up and stuff. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's awesome. What would you say some of the goals are for Death Before Dishonor aside from this, upcoming European tour, like within the next year?
So we just got back from the West Coast. We got this European run right now, which is a headlining run. Then we actually go back to Europe in June for 2 weeks. It's a headliner, but a lot of festivals. We got a couple festivals in the States this summer, but we're gonna do a new record this year. We were hoping to get in sooner than later, but the guy we record with, we can't get in until like middle of summer. So it's probably gonna come out more towards the end of the year or early next year. But with that said, we're gonna record a full length. Um, a bunch more stuff like later after we get back from Europe in June. Then we'll probably record maybe a couple festivals in the States and then a bunch of touring in the States. And then hopefully this record will be out by the end of this year, early next year. And also, like, with that, next year will be 20 years of Friends Family Forever. So we'll probably do some type of like repress with that later in the year
Nice.
when the new record comes out. So try to get a new record out and just, like I said, we're like doing more than we have been in a bit, like the last few years. And I keep on being like, without being crazy, but like if good opportunities come, we're down to do it. So it's just about being a little smart instead of being like, yes, yes, yes. Just do as much as we can. Put out a new
Yeah.
record. That record, it'll be a full length. We're gonna record that with Zeus. And we already have a bunch of the songs. It's just a matter. The timing didn't work out to record because I was actually hoping to record right before we were going to Europe right now. But Zeus is super busy. So we'll record later. That'll be out Bridge 9 later this year, early next year. And then
Nice.
just keep on doing what we do, man.
Man, and I love your guys' recordings, the way they sound. And I'm a bassist, and like I think the bass tones on those albums are so like fucking punchy and
Yeah,
just
yeah.
so like amazing, like just quality, man. So I'll be definitely looking forward to that. I'm stoked on that. Yeah. Well, cool, man. Before we go, is there anybody you wanted to shout out as far as individuals, or we were talking about bands earlier. Anybody you want to give props to?
I mean, obviously, all those bands I mentioned, Haywire, Risk, um, Hard Cash, Remain. Check them out. COA. You for doing the interview. Anybody that's listening? I don't know.
Cool.
Everybody. Uh,
Thank you, sir.
yeah. Anybody that's checking it out. Anybody that checks out that Before Dishonor, we appreciate it, and that's it.
Nice, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for joining the show. Like I said at the top of the hour, one thing I like to do is promote my merch company, Hell's Heart Merch Co. You can see at the bottom there, hellsheartco.bigcartel.com. Use the code 20 for 20% off your entire order, which would be awesome. And I got my own press, so I make the shirts to order. I'm gonna throw up a few samples of some of the shirts. Here's a little Black Flag mock that we do.
Cool.
Um, there's a Steve McQueen bullet shirt. Like I said, I'm into movies, so if you like movies, we got movie themed shirts. There's a Psycho 2 one right there. Um, there's a Scream glow in the dark one with Tatum from Scream, and then there's also a Randy glow in the dark one with Randy from Scream. So if you like movies, you like hardcore, you like all that stuff, check it out. It'll be awesome. And I'll be sure to post all the links to all your guys' social media here in the comments section. So, people can, if they haven't heard you before, they can check you out and, support you guys. So, everybody, I want to thank everybody for joining the stream. And like I said, namaste, jobless, be good. Bryan Harris, thanks, man. Hang out for a minute.
For sure. Thank you for having me, though.
Absolutely, sir. All right, everybody. Have a good one.